trying to make some sense of what happened yesterday with the Colonel and 38 Studios.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Double my fun tonight, Tim White and Ted Nesi, because I need some great minds on this. Forget the rundown of Washington and everything else that's going on here. This conversation is really important. You know, last night on my rundown, by the way, welcome in. Thank you for tuning in. I said something that was painful for me to say, but I meant it, that the Colonel was stinking the joint out when it came to communications with this state. Now, you know, I'm kind of a layman in a blue-collar mind, and I speak my mind, and I'm not retreating on that. And yesterday, in my judgment, perhaps not my guests, if they're inclined to be a little bit more objective in terms of the science they apply to analysis, but I thought that was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen from a colonel of the state police, especially this force, which is, you know, the last bastion of incredible integrity in this state. Flawless? Yeah, because, I mean, flawed? Of course, it's a human exercise, but my goodness, to more or less throw the former colonel on the bus, say, I don't know much about the investigation, but I'm confident in its outcome, was just, well, I'll let my guests elaborate. So, with no further ado, here are a couple of headlines that I think are important. This guy, by the way, gets all the juice. He cries to the Providence Journal, and the colonel comes running. You know, the credible media in this state try to get an answer. We get nothing. Second headline kind of reflects Tim's work, and here's what he put together last night.
In an impromptu news conference, Colonel Assumpico said she wanted to answer questions as to why certain transcripts with lawmakers weren't part of their big release of 38 Studios documents last week. The answer was simple: they didn't exist.
I'm as bothered by all of this as you are.
Colonel Assumpico lashing out at Curt Schilling, who questioned why detectives didn't interview key players from the 38 Studios deal, including lawyer and tax broker Michael Corso, as well as former House Speakers Gordon Fox and William Murphy.
It is my understanding that each of these individuals declined to be interviewed, and it is their legal right to do so.
Though they could still have been interviewed by the grand jury that investigated the case. Assumpico also says there was a reason transcripts from some lawmakers that voted on a loan guarantee program weren't released in documents last week.
But at some point, the investigators were told by members of the former administration that taping these interviews was not necessary.
Former State Police Colonel Stephen O'Donnell tells Target-12 no one was ordered not to record interviews, but that detectives may have decided certain people wouldn't have much to offer. Assumpico also says there was no formal interview with Attorney General Peter Kilmartin, who was a lawmaker at the time, because he was questioned by the previous administration of the state police.
We have no records of that interview. Why? I can't explain that.
But despite all these questions, the state police say they have no plans to reopen the 38 Studios criminal case.
If we could have pressed charges against somebody, believe me, we would have, but we just didn't have it.
O'Donnell tells me he has spoken with Kilmartin about the 38 Studios case many times, but Kilmartin had little to offer besides saying that he voted on the loan guarantee program. So O'Donnell says detectives may have decided not to do a formal interview as a result. He also added that he stands by the work his detectives did on this case.
All righty, two places at once.
Voila.
Voila. Thanks, guys, for coming. Summary judgment is?
Well, I think there are a few
or
things.
Or executive summary, I guess it would be the better way
The
to say
executive summary for me, there are two things here, and you touched on one of them, and that is, I think it's very difficult for the new Colonel Assumpico to have it both ways on this one, to come out and to question how the investigation was handled and say, quote, you know, that's not how I would have done it, raise all these questions about interviews being recorded but then not recorded and then some being done on the phone. It's a very sensitive topic for people in Rhode Island, and so that just once again puts us on edge. Is like, okay, what's going on here? And then at the end of the press conference, go, by the way, I'm fine with the fact that there were no criminal charges, and we're not going to reopen the investigation. I think it's very difficult to have it both ways, to want to be able to say those two things.
I think it's a mess. It's a mess because there's a reason we talked for years about the possibility of an independent investigation, not an investigation to go for criminal charges, but to most people, I think, refer back to Bruce Sunderland's report after the credit union crisis. And the idea is, get all the facts out there, the dirty laundry, who did what, how did this come about, what was the politics, as well as anything on the law enforcement side, so the citizenry can move on and kind of know who was good, who was bad, and how they feel about things. The governor said Gina Raimondo said she'd do one in our debate in 2014. She backtracked on that. No one in the legislature seems interested in it. Those oversight hearings kind of went sideways when they were happening. And so you end up with this. I once wrote that 38 Stews is now like a live grenade that can go off any time in Rhode Island politics, because there's always the possibility we haven't heard the whole story yet. But it's now getting all mucked up with feuds inside the state police and with the Attorney General's office, the governor's office, triangulating with the Attorney General. It's no way to run a railroad.
Yeah, well, I had said to Tim on the radio yesterday, it's kind of like those wires behind the stereo that you've left there for 20 years. You keep adding components, and now it's really hard to figure out, how, and you said, no, it's like a good hairball, or there's no good hairball, but it's a hairball. There's no doubt about it. Elementally, I see both of your points and double down, agree completely with what you've said. But even more elementarily, I cannot believe that this colonel had what she thought was her version of common sense to tell us that she's more or less unfamiliar with the investigation, at least on a detail level. What? One of the first obligations I would think that you would do is to do as much of a recovery. I get that's not her track. I get that's not where she was.
She didn't go through the intelligence unit of the state police where most colonels had done that.
And I don't expect her to have at her fingertips the details on every investigation in the last 5 years that the state police has done. But there's no more premier political white-collar criminal potential case than this case. And for her to assert that more or less we know as much as she does about this thing, I thought was fascinatingly disturbing.
Well, understand the context in which she said that, and that is with the grand jury material is really what she's referring to. She is saying she does not have the legal right or authority, like you or Ted, to review the grand jury material because that is secret at the time. I think there's an argument to be made that she probably could have and could have inserted herself if she's going to put herself out there.
I didn't. So that's where you and I might part slight ways. I didn't take it. I agree that that's a component of what she doesn't know, and I think she's got a legitimate basis for asserting that because you're making that case for her. But the assertion, I watched the tape 3 times. You were there, so but her assertion more or less, her word was, "Listen, you know as much as I do. It's all on our website." There are plenty of things that she should be able to know and be conversant about in terms of the 38 Studios investigation for the work that the state police exclusively did outside the grand jury, and she couldn't reflect on it.
Here's where I'll agree with you on that. I asked her a question, did you talk to the former Colonel Steve O'Donnell about this?
Exactly.
When she is talking, she never used his name, but she would say the previous administration told them to stop recording. The previous administration, someone from the previous administration interviewed Peter Kilmartin. Who and why, I don't know. Did you talk to Steve O'Donnell? No, I didn't. Well, you probably should, I think, if you're going to want to find out how to improve, in your mind, you need to improve the investigatory process at the state police, which she said she wants to do. You probably want to learn from what she sees as mistakes and probably should have talked to the
Which goes to your point, that it's a real mess when and the state police, obviously a human organization, has had its politics. It's a power organization, so the politics of professional growth and the like are always in play. But there's always been kind of a, I don't know, for lack of a better term, a curtain, or not a curtain, but a standard they protect. They protect the organization. She wasn't protecting the organization, while at the same time she was more or less complaining that the organization was being negatively criticized or overly criticized by the whole thing.
I was thinking as you guys are talking a little about what's happened with James Comey on the Clinton emails and the Trump-Russia investigation.
Head of the FBI.
They're head of the FBI. There's a reason, historically, that law enforcement folks don't talk about their investigations outside their investigations, right? Because you get into this, kind of a mess of, I don't know this, but I know this, and like, well, why did you tell us that piece, but you're not telling us this piece? Even here, you get a very close-up look at their investigative methods. You know, no one yet, I think, has told us exactly who made the call that they would stop recording lawmaker interviews. As Tim has pointed out, there could be perfectly defensible reasons to stop recording them. Maybe you find they're not leading to anything, and they just say, you know what, we got to bang these out and talk to everybody, and it's not worth it. But we don't even have someone coming forward to say, here's who made that decision, here's why they made that decision. It just seems like everything that happens is being put together in a way that only feeds conspiracy theories. And of course, sometimes conspiracy theories are true, but even if they're not, it's only feeding people's distrust on something where there's already massive distrust.
So for years, literally years, I've been begging for an external investigation. I'll ask these guys what they think about the likelihood of that fixing this mess. Stay with us.
End of the day, it's going to be the court that decides. I'm on the side of transparency, and I'm going to go to the court and say, let's release everything.
Well, that's Gina Raimondo, our governor, a couple of months ago, talking about what I consider to be her kind of a political recovery plan from the commitment she made during a terrific gubernatorial debate back in 2014. In that election cycle, when Tim asked her directly the question, are you going to open up an investigation on 38 Studios? And she said yes. She's never committed to that, and what she's referring to there is the governor's petition to the Superior Court for the release of the grand jury documents, which are on a parallel course with the state police investigation and might fill in some blanks.
And a shot at Attorney General Peter Kilmartin in that soundbite. When she says, I'm on the side of transparency, that's a shot at Peter Kilmartin. That's what she says.
Well, and that's part of what's going on here, right? You've got Kilmartin, who very notably did not rule out primarying Gina Raimondo on our show months ago. I know her office noticed that. So you've got them kind of squabbling, Raimondo and Kilmartin. You've got the Mattiello-Raimondo stuff, which is an ever chillier relationship at the moment.
The Speaker of the House.
The Speaker of the House. And remember that, you know, I think part of her calculus when she backed off and refused to do the independent investigation she promised was the Assembly probably didn't want that, and she was trying to get her bills and proposals through the General Assembly. I don't know if her calculus will change as she has a less and less positive relationship with the Speaker in particular. You know, the Senate. She gets
well, it would be a
well
shame if your theory, if your wondering theory is on track, and I have no doubt it could be. It would be another shame that the political wheels coming off would guide. I mean, relationships fracturing would guide the decision to do what I think is the right thing 6 years ago, which was to put out an independent investigation and at least minimally cull all, and even after the grand, I think we have to see what happens with the grand jury stuff. If that comes out, someone's got to cull this and put it in perspective for us.
Well, here's the deal, too. What happened yesterday has reignited those calls for an independent investigation. The governor's office wants 38 Studios to go away.
Can't do it.
So badly.
Can't do it.
As many politicians, as you called it, a live grenade. And that's why they want it to go away. But what happened yesterday, they reignited that conversation by holding that bizarre press conference out there and raising more questions.
And then
about
she
it.
doubled down. Later on another media, she was doubling down, suggesting that, oh, well, what all the colonel was doing was confirming that the original state police investigation was sloppy. And the inference for people to pay attention is, well, that's one of the reasons O'Donnell's not here. I mean, she didn't say that, but that's where the whole cake is baking here.
But there are consequences to saying that, right?
Of course there are.
And the consequences are we're now relooking at calls for an independent investigation. So
as well as why should
might
people
be too.
believe they were correct not to bring criminal charges if the woman who now leads the agency that conducted the investigation is saying, I don't know if she used the word sloppy, but it says she has concerns about how it was
Well, that was my point at the top of the show, right? You can't have it both ways. You can't question the investigation and then say, I'm okay with no criminal charges.
So Colonel O'Donnell plays a significant role in this, right? He was passive-aggressively, I think, criticized yesterday by the current colonel. I had significant disagreements, one which we'll show here and one in the next segment, with Colonel O'Donnell about the process here. He had floated early on that the legislative hearings or independent policing of themselves, investigations, might hinder his own state police investigation. Later on last year, like 5 years later, he was still referring to the process and how they investigate.
it morphed into a pretty long-term investigation with the Attorney General's office. The U.S. Attorney looked at a small piece of that. We meet all the time on it. It's not something that we don't pay attention to. It's there. I won't tell you what the end game was. That wouldn't be fair, because tomorrow or the next day I'll be getting inquiries from everybody from around the country about it. But for the legislative hearings, the impact they have on us is whatever we know through our investigative process, we have to pay attention to what people say at those hearings, and we compare what they said there to what they said to us, if they said something to us. And then we also went to the depositions. When the depositions came out, it was incumbent upon us to have our detectives read every single deposition and compare those depositions of everybody that was deposed.
Well, now, that was in March of 16, and what he's actually saying is what I was trying to explain to him 3 years prior, which is let the legislature have their independent hearings, Watergate style, for lack of a better comparison, and take notes. So what he was referring to was that fledgling oversight process that the House Finance Committee finally dragged itself into when Mattiello was thinking, all right, we better let the state rep up there, Karen Crazy Macbeth, in his words, in his mind, not his words, but his mind.
Like, he said that.
But we all know he thinks she's crazy. Blah, 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 blah.
I think one thing, though, I'm thinking about, that as we have this conversation, it's an important one, and about these different very powerful groups and agencies, is, you know, one problem with all this is the people. There's two people I'd like to hear from at this point. Be fulsome and full-throated in what they know about this.
One's in jail.
One is in jail, Gordon Fox, former speaker, and one is not talking, Michael Corso, the former tax credit broker and Fox ally. As far as we know, every time someone, whether it's media or whether it's a law enforcement thing, we don't know for sure, but if they went before the grand jury, they did plead the fifth in other places, like the civil deposition. If those two won't talk, it's going to be very hard for us to ever know exactly how this all came about originally, because it seems like it was an extremely close-held discussion. You know, Costantino's been squeezed pretty good for everything he knows. Now, maybe he hasn't told everything, but he's certainly been questioned.
The former House
at
Finance
length.
Chairman.
Well, we would know more, and you cover the trials as part of your expertise. The grand jury testimony will indicate whether Tim's appetite will be satiated here. If not, you know, maybe there is a circumstantial case that can be built. But until you've got the whole thing in its whole perspective, it's very difficult. I know you got a point on Curt Schilling that you want to make, and it's a really important one. We're going to make that when we come back. Stay with us. I thought the U.S. Attorney had no interest.
They had a small piece of 38 Studios in the beginning. I think the Attorney General already spoke about that one piece. I think it was the SEC piece.
And frankly, I think the Attorney General should have recused himself. He was a sitting rep during that time.
No, honestly, you know, you and I have talked about that, and this particular case, we talked at length. I did with the Attorney General, and right from the get-go, I was very comfortable what his role, if any, was back then, and with the prosecutors, that this case would go forward. So.
Well, that's Colonel O'Donnell shows up, offers his opinion. I respect him for that. It's the one thing, there's two things he and I have had vehement disagreement over. Only two in his whole career. A, whether he should have influenced negatively policing hearings on the legislature on itself, and the idea that the AG was cool. And in fact, he actually gave the AG a pass to say, hey, listen, he's okay. He can conduct the investigation, in my opinion. We've seen nothing that preempts that. On its face, common sense, you're a state rep, you voted for the loan guarantee program that authorized the funding for 38 studios. It doesn't matter if you knew anything more or less, you recuse yourself from the investigation.
Optics alone.
And it is unbelievable that we've gone this long with this mess.
The U.S. Attorney General just recused himself on the President Trump-Russia stuff. Even though he says he too has a very good alibi. He was a senator, he needed to meet with the Russian ambassador, XYZ, but he said, my professional staff said, it just doesn't look right, and I'm going to step back.
Interestingly, you know, Steve O'Donnell is a loyal guy. Now, I don't know if his loyalty is to the office of AG or to Peter Kilmartin, but because if Kilmartin had recused himself, I don't think Steve O'Donnell would have been saying, wait, don't do that. I think this responsibility is not Steve O'Donnell. I don't think the colonel at the time should have protected the AG's, you know, space that way. But good Lord, that this Attorney General didn't recognize that is unbelievable. And adding to the ridiculous drama, he's floating and not denying on your shows that he might run for governor. I mean,
or something else.
What a integrity political mess we have
Well, to
here.
flip that around, do you think there would be what they're concerned about is the campaign ad that comes out that says he had to recuse himself from the 38 Studios investigation, and that's probably politically
easily answerable by saying I did the right thing, da-da-da-da-da-da. I mean, if you run in fear, you're right. I mean, a lot of these politicians do run in fear of having been cut, spliced, and twisted in the next campaign. But you got to do the right thing in real time. You have a point on Curt Schilling, though, which I think is fascinating.
One of the things that has been driving me nuts is this use of Curt Schilling, or at least in the Providence Journal, as a law enforcement expert.
And do I have to remind anybody who's watching this that Curt Schilling's at the core of this? He is the guy that lost $50 million. He is the guy that owned 38 Studios.
Hell of a pitcher.
He is the guy that had a bloody sock and was a hero, and now is, I don't even know how to define him, but he's the guy who complained, front page in the Providence Journal, we showed it yesterday, and that caused the colonel to actually react.
Yeah, well, that's what she said caused it. I think there was some other motivation in there, which was what 90% of the press conference was
Meaning what?
about.
Your queries, my queries, and everybody else's queries?
Correct.
Yes. Thank
but
you.
Curt Schilling coming out and saying, I can't believe Michael Corso wasn't interviewed by detectives. I can't believe that Gordon Fox and former House Speaker William Murphy weren't interviewed, and sort of this breathless coverage of all that. Here's the deal, very common. And as a matter of fact, people who are the subject of criminal investigations have the legal right to say, I'm not talking to detectives. What they can't do is ignore a subpoena before a grand jury, and the stakes are higher. So while the grand jury stuff remains under seal, this is why it's so important, I feel, for this stuff to be released, because it is going to answer that question. It would be unbelievable if Michael Corso was not brought before
Do you think
a grand
that'll
jury.
impact the judge's decision on release of the grand jury documents?
I don't know. Justice Gibney
I never
has
predict
a,
what a judge is
has
gonna
a big
do.
decision on her hands. I think if anyone feels distant enough to dispassionately look at this stuff, it's someone like I don't know Justice Gibney and all. I just assume that the judicial branch feels a little more removed from, they really didn't do anything wrong in this, they feel. And so, you saw Judge Silverstein come to his point where he said, all right, you can have all the civil suit documents. Here they are. And have at it.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
Which is not
Protecting
It is
the
not
integrity
comparable.
of the grand jury going forward.
Not only that, the word, I'm going to guess what the judge is thinking here, the word is precedent. As soon as she gives the okay to release the grand jury materials of 38 Studios, she's thinking ahead, okay, what other cases is that going to impact down the road?
Well, you also got to go backwards because they've done it before. The John Young case and a couple of others.
But what's the difference there? There were associated civil suits, and different from the 38 Studio civil suits, that gave the courts the avenue to release that material.
Right.
That's the difference.
I'd ask them where it goes from here, but they don't know. And neither do I.
Or at least
But
we're not telling.
That was really? We'll be right back. Guys, thank you so much for your
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Now, recently I spoke with Governor Raimondo about the stench that 38 Studios continues to have over our economy, growing business, jobs, and she admitted, and you can find that interview on the podcast at 630 WPRO.com for the Dan York Show, which airs 3 to 6 weekdays on WPRO, and listen to her admit that every time she goes out of this state to try to cultivate business, she has to respond to the 38 Studios thing. Why that doesn't lead her, and especially with yesterday's mess, to see that she needs to call for an independent outside investigation and culling of all the information is beyond me. Governor, please, respectfully, wake up. Good night.